their directions. And interestingly, we've seen with Brexit, where now one of the major trading companies in the world started looking inwards. We've seen America also, with their Make America Great Again, start looking inwards. And incidentally, the African continent is probably the last bastion and real investment opportunity left. But we are looking outwards. Now, the issue of trade policies, I believe Africa is going to address through the CFTA and the compacts that we have intra-continental. Now, the interest is to ensure that we trade amongst ourselves. Because if that opportunity exists and we take advantage of it, it will do much better in creating wealth on the continent than otherwise. And I do concede that there are many economies that are under the stranglehold of developed countries. For example, I've said many times that Africa's inability to become a major agricultural nation is because the global trade infrastructure itself, or global trade architecture, perhaps prevents that. Because as we speak, despite the looming food crisis globally, some countries still dump foods. But the African continent harbors or is home to 65% of the remaining arable land left in the world. So if you are really talking agriculture, it's Africa. Secondly, a significant proportion of Africans are in agriculture, right across the value chain, from production to whatever little value chain there is. And so it's important to renegotiate whatever terms and renegotiate whatever conditions we operate with in agriculture. But having a huge intracontinental market would be the natural solution for that, so that you don't have to depend on other covenants that are not suitable to the continent. And I believe that what we are going to see in the next few years or months is many African countries now reviewing their trade policies and making them structurally important for their economies as well as the African economy. So I hope that answers your question to a certain extent. The quest for economic power is global, and everybody, and I believe almost every country, seeks to be. But we as Africans now need a new narrative where we will add value to our resource in situ before we export. The important outcome of that whole equation is that we would then operate at the higher ends of the value chain. And that is when you will see Africa creating wealth. For example, if you look at cocoa, and one of the questioners did say that, every year, between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, who produce approximately 70% of the world's cocoa beans, our cocoa crop is maybe at best $7 billion. But yes, if you look at the chocolate industry alone, just chocolate, it's right now trending up to about $140 billion a year. Now, as the two countries with 70% of the cocoa beans, where do we want to be? Just producing the beans? Definitely not. Add value to it. So you see that quite recently, that narrative has resonated very well in Ghana, and we've had a number of companies come out in the value addition space. But we need to create a bigger economy in that. We need to create critical mass. So the big thing is how we can migrate many of our producers, and indeed, not just our producers, but our traders, to also go into manufacturing for export. And that is a critical linchpin to moving away from being subject to global trends. And so this is one of the issues that we are going to talk about. How do we mobilize investments onto the continent? And I'll use that to also answer a question that came up about intra-continental investment. Now, for the longest time, despite Africa's wealth, its people have been poor. And that is primarily because we export our raw materials and our resources to outside the continent. And I've just given you an example. I'm told that, and I stand to be corrected though, I'm told that a ton of bauxite out of the ground is just about $60. But if you consider the same process into aluminium and into process into alumina and into aluminium, that is multiplied over 100 times. And the demand for aluminium is global. The demand for iron and steel is global. The demand for lithium is even more global now. And Africa can actually leverage its resource, its lithium resource, to chart a new path, even with the global trade infrastructure. Lithium is required for Industry 4.0, or the new direction of global economies. It's used in all the batteries for electric cars. Coltan, for example, is required for every mobile phone, not to mention chromium and platinum, which are also then cobalt. And all these are found in significant quantities on the continent. The big challenge is whether to extract those resources because of the dire need of resources to develop ourselves, or to create a new path where we add value before we export, because that will have much higher value and bring us much more money into the continent. But that is a direction which I believe very strongly that most of Africa is committed to. And so what we're going to probably see is very soon, almost every African country would want to add value to its mineral resources before it exports them, because that will bring multiples of the wealth that we require, as against just exporting the raw materials. And one would ask, as a questioner asks, why hasn't it happened all this time? It's because perhaps we hadn't done it. We just exported the raw materials. I mean, and rightly said, the global trade rules has made it so. Indeed, if you look at gold, for example, even if you want to sell gold in today's world, the agency that will certify your gold is not in Africa. It's not African. It sits in a country that does not mine gold. So as a continent, we need to find a way to have our own way of standardizing and certifying the gold. And as we speak, I mean, in Ghana, we've already had one gold refinery set up quite recently, such that we just don't export the gold raw, but we add value. We process it, we refine it, which brings multiples in wealth to it before we export. And that is the narration that we're likely to see in Africa. On the other hand, too, is the regulatory framework. Now, that is why the AFCFTA is important, because what it does is that it is going to rewrite protocols that we all agree to in creating that tariff-free market. And it's a big enough market, like I said. It's as big as China, and it's as big as India. Now, if you look at the economic history right across the world, population has always been a factor in wealth creation in regions. If you look at some of the biggest countries in the world, who are also some of the richest countries, it's because of the population size. If you look at some of the very small countries, which are the richest in the world too, it's because they process other people's raw materials and goods and create services for others. I don't think any of this is lost on Africa. Indeed, I think Africa is now more excited into taking that same trajectory and ensuring that we become the continent that you need to come to for value. Now, the issue of capital investing on the continent, intracontinental investments, which currently is about 5%. I think it has a historical construct to it, in the sense that over the past few decades, post the independence era, most of African private sector has not been pushed into wealth creation or capital formation. Most of our governments were nationalistic, and most of them were central governments, and did not necessarily invigorate the private sector enough to create wealth. And as you all well know, it's not every state that the government can employ everybody or the government can go into business. There seems to be a perceived inefficiency when governments run businesses, which has led to privatizations all over the world. But when private sector is invigorated, energized, and empowered, you see wealth creation happening at a faster rate. And that is where Ghana is right now. And quite recently, as somebody said, the president went along with a group of very capable private sector players to Abu Dhabi to have a very open chat about the opportunities and how we can work together for mutual benefit. And it was extremely successful. Many of the and had engaged into very serious, discussions. Indeed, very early this morning, one of the very prominent businessmen called me and he asked me, but why your people like that? And I said, which people? And he said, your people from the Emirates. Since I got back Saturday, they haven't let me sleep. Every 10 minutes, somebody's calling, asking, so what do we do with this? Calling, what do we do with that? That is the level of intensity we want in this country. They understand business, and they know how to do it. And so, even us going out and engaging with these people, we get to understand what the global demands are, what the standards are, and we learn. And my dear friend says they come and invest in Ghana, and then when they make the money, they take it all away. Well, the important thing is that we have to also make money here and keep it here. Because I can assure you that if you became a big, prominent businessman, and you became a supplier of FDI, and for example, you set up a big business in Togo, and you made a lot of money in Togo, I doubt you tell me that I will leave the money in Togo. You bring it back home. You will bring it back home. That's the import of, but there is a lot to be said for FDI. It brings capital, it brings technology, it brings state-of-the-art know-how, it also gives you taxes, but it also creates another opportunity for you to build and learn upon and create your own. And so we should sometimes not just look at the negative aspect, we should latch onto the positive and ride it to our own benefit. And I believe that we should be able to do so. We are quite keen now. I believe that the country has entered into another mode where we realize that we have to do quite a lot about what we have already to build a stronger nation. So that is that. And yes, many countries also set up regulatory frameworks to protect their own. We have ours. We also have some protectionist policies here. But it depends on what it gives to us. And technically, if you want to have some protectionism, you must make sure that it benefits your people optimally. If it doesn't, then perhaps it's not as useful. So we need to do some of these things, and we need to work with an open and constructive and progressive mind. The important thing is we must grow into wealth, and we must find the opportunities for wealth creation. And yes, at some point, Nigerians blocked their borders for various reasons, and it obstructed Ghanaian traders going across. But with the AFCFTA protocols, we are going to have a way of having remedials from all these country rules and regulations by adopting a common framework that will enable us trade effectively. We are not there yet, but we are gradually getting there. And additionally, there's going to be an investment protocol written up which enables us to standardize and create standards in investment attraction, but also to open up the continent so that intracontinental investments can take place, without inhibitions. So we are at a very good point in our history where we can transform very positively, even on the back of recent developments that have happened globally. What for me it signifies is that the world is in a new phase. New countries are seeking new partnerships and new trading partners. In fact, the pandemic led to a wave of what we call onshoring and reshoring, where countries were now looking at where to place factories, etc., etc. And Africa in that equation sounds and looks extremely attractive. So for us, it's important to also bring in the investment to produce on the continent for the continent, but desirably by indigenous of the continent. I hope I've answered the questions. The currency issue. Well, the currency issue, so far as we are importing much more than we are exporting, we would always have the CD under threat from imports. Bear in mind, the trade equation is that we take monies from here, because payments is in dollars, we buy dollars here, and then use them to buy goods from another economy, bring the goods here, sell in CDs. and then we want to convert them back into dollars. And so we have that equation that makes sure that because we are not producing enough ourselves, our currency will always be under threat. Because when you buy dollars off the market and you go and buy goods and you bring them here and you sell them, you want to convert the cities back to dollars. You understand how it works. And it's always difficult. But can you imagine if we're exporting much more than we're importing? We would have a good cash flow of dollars, which will not put pressure on the city. The important thing is we need to move away from exporting our raw materials just for dollars into manufacturing which you can sell and export at much higher values. And that is why I said that there is a new paradigm of renegotiation of many of these trade covenants. But the most important part is that if we can trade internally, it will solve a lot of those problems. And I'm sure many of you know about the Pan-African Payment Plan, which ensures that you can buy and sell in your local currencies within the continent. If that happens, it's going to create a new opportunity of wealth creation in almost every country. So I hope that answers your question. I hope you are convinced. So I was just going to go there. But I also have to say that one of the important constructs that makes the dollar still strong in global trade is that almost all oil and gas and gold is traded only in dollars. And so far as many countries still need to buy gold as a store of value, they will use dollars. In fact, most of the trade architecture depends on foreign currencies. You're either buying and selling dollars, buying and selling euros, or buying and selling in yuan as in China. But can you imagine if you were buying and selling everything in Ghana in cedis only? It would be a very powerful currency for us. Now, the issue of the common currency. Maybe just to give you a little bit of highlight. I mean, if you take the European Union, for example, it was first proposed by a French civil servant called Jean Monnet. It took 50 years to implement, only because of currency. So it's not an easy answer that, oh yes, we should all adopt a common currency, because these are 54 or 55 countries at varying levels of economic development, and each with its own sovereignty, who wants to maintain its currency, except a few regional bodies like UMOA, which is the Francophone zone in West Africa, which uses the CFA as a common currency. But I believe that gradually we will get to a point. There's still a lot of work to be done. For example, easing access to countries. There are still countries in Africa that require you to have a visa before going there. If we really want to trade and make movement within our countries easy, then those are some of the issues we want to look at. There is also issues of nationalism and sovereignty. Will we just permit anybody from anywhere to just come into our market to trade? And then they also agree that we can go to their countries to trade freely. Those are still issues to contend. And I'm sure you are quite aware of the problems that Guta has been having. These are all things that need new thinking. But the important thing is that whatever thoughts we put to the table must inure to our benefit in creating wealth and opportunity in our economy. So adoption of a common currency, yes, it's going to take a while. The ECO, as you spoke about, has taken many years to achieve. And that's because there are qualifying criteria that you need to meet as a country. Your inflation levels, your exchange levels, your interest rates, etc. must be at a certain stabilized level before you can engage into it. And that has been a challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Yoofi. Please.
The assembly between Papa and Mr. Wara, we'll speak back to English. I'm sure you understand English very well. Yes. You know, you ask a very, very important question. And one of the things that GIPC have discussed with Ministry of Trade, and we're going to do, is to percolate down the protocols of the AFCFTA to our informal market, particularly our SMEs and SMIs. It is very clear, the President has made it very clear to those of us in the private sector must be energized to take over the wheels of economic growth in the country. And our private sector, if you look at the Ghanaian economy, 85% of our economy is SMEs and SMIs, small and medium-sized economies. Even for cocoa, for which we are a major global player, the average size of a cocoa farm in Ghana is 3 acres. So we are very small and very informal. Now, how do you energize those to also upscale? You do it with partnerships and linkages for trade. So even as you look and bring in big investors, you also try and get local people into the supply chains of some of these companies. And there are many countries with examples to bear in that. Singapore, for one, the Emirates, another, even Mauritius in Africa. And by partnering with local people and getting people well entrenched in the supply chains of some of these big players, we also get to develop our informal private sector. One of the critical elements in all this is when there are reshoring and onshoring opportunities in factories. Because as a country, if we are not very well advanced to start manufacturing everything from start to finish, what you can do is to plug in the value chain of some of these things, what we call global value chains. So for example, we have rubber in Ghana. How about we producing rubber for cars in Morocco and South Africa? We have cotton here. How about we producing textiles for the factories in Kenya and Mauritius? We have cocoa. I know that Rwanda, for example, are very keen to start making their own chocolate. How do we enter into trade with them to ensure that our private sector players get opportunities to sell semi-finished products so that they can add value? So it's all about, that's why it's all about engagement and charting a new path. Incidentally, Africans are very nationalistic somehow. But I believe that the time is now coming that we shall look at the global economy communally, because that is how we can create value on the continents to grow. There's absolutely no question that the AFCFTA is probably one of the most important developments on the African continent since Ghana gained independence in 1957. And Ghana is so well positioned to take advantage of that. And I keep saying all the time that Ghana, by God's grace, is in the center of the world. We are the only country on latitude 0 and longitude 0. So we have a 360 view in our relationships with the world. And as I did say a few days back, we neither look north, south, east, or west. We look forward. And now, it starts now. And my good friend asked, but why is that it hasn't happened all the time and it's now happening? Life is dynamic, time is dynamic. And I would seek solace in the Bible. So when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I worked as a child. But as I grew up, I started speaking like a grown. We are now speaking like grown-ups in the continent and in Ghana particularly. Things may not be perfect, but they are well on the way to being great. And so we need to be energized. We need to motivate ourselves and not only look at the bad things, but look at the good things that can happen. Human beings dwell on goodness, not on badness. I mean, I have many friends in business today who would tell me that they don't listen to radio or watch TV because I'm going to say something, I'm sure you all are, because they don't like the noise. Neither does their money. What they want to hear is a positivity, and so we need to push that positivity. And yes, sometimes it's hard. But you can only take a step forward if you are positive. If you are negative, you take a step backwards. So all the things happening now today show that there is a new narration coming out. And we need to motivate ourselves. We can't always just accept that things are bad and Africa is bad. Africa is good. And when I go outside and I travel around the world, I'm sometimes taken aback and surprised about how everybody talks about Africa, 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 and the African opportunity. But when you come home, it's a different thing. So we are starting that conversation right from here. That is why we are having the Africa Prosperity Dialogues. That is why the AFCFTA headquarters is in Ghana, because they recognize that Ghana is doing certain things that Africa should have done many years ago. For example, the one district, one factory policy. It's a nascent industrialization policy. Can you imagine what will happen if every year 200 factories or even 10 factories are set up in areas of the country. Can you imagine what will happen in 5 years? Opportunities will be created for young people. You also create trade opportunities, and even those who want to stay in the retail business can now find products from your country to sell to other countries. So it's a new, like I said, take it. And for you in the press, I think this is really your calling. This is truly your calling. That to make our countries great again, to make the continent great again, you need to step up to the plate. It's not always about the negative story. Africa needs positive stories, and you are the ones who carry the story. It's not us. We only generate, you carry. So I hope that this will inspire you to look out and say that, yes, maybe we now need to start talking of opportunity and how to push our own people into these opportunities. So that's my simple message to you this morning. Thank you.
Please subscribe.